Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Kathy Newcomer, and on behalf of the Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration, as well as the George Washington University, I want to welcome all of you in the room and all of you who are watching this at home on your computers. Thank you for joining us. We are really excited to have the second of our series of grants management breakfasts. And I think you all know, but there are a lot of grants that go out in our federal system. A lot of our government services and programs are operated through grants. You know, millions and millions of dollars go through grants, and many, many people think, as those of you here and watching us, are very concerned with being as effective as the federal government possibly can in grants management. We think this is an extremely important topic, and we are thrilled to be partnering with REI Systems. That is a contractor that has done a lot with regard to transparency of data in our federal government and with grants. So it's a natural partnership. Our students, our Master of Public Policy and Master of Public Administration students, are going out and working in public service, whether it be within the government agencies or with the broad network of organizations that are involved in governance in our society. So we're delighted that you are here. It's a gorgeous spring day. George Washington beat Florida last night in the quarter, just in case you didn't know. So they're going to be going to the semifinals for NIT, which is nice. So there's just a lot going on to celebrate. And I'm just delighted. Our speaker, I've been looking very much forward to our speaker today, and I'm going to introduce my partner in this endeavor, Paul Aninos, who is Vice President at REI Systems, and he will introduce our speaker. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks very much, Dr. Newcomer. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to join Kathy in welcoming all of you that have braved the DC commute to be here today, and even errant Uber drivers, I understand, and also those of you online that have joined us from wherever you happen to be. So welcome. And I just want to accent the great feelings that we have about this partnership with the Trachtenberg School. Without Kathy and Amber and all the student support, I don't think we would all be here today. So thank you very much for that, and thanks for all of you that are here today. You know, when I introduce REI Systems, Kathy's partner in crime here, when I introduce REI Systems to people, I'll tell them a little bit about us, and I kind of start with, we got started over 20 years ago with a small SBIR grant from NASA, and I think Barbara's here from NASA today, and then I'll go on to say, well, we got really interested in this grants field because we received a grant. Now we kind of learned a little bit about grants and how to process grants and how to administer major grants programs, and now 20 years later, REI runs about $20 billion a year of federal money from the federal treasury, passing it through our grant systems to the state and local governments in a bunch of different agencies, a lot of whom are actually represented here. And so when I say that to people, they kind of cock their head and they say, well, grants management, that doesn't really sound that exciting to me. So I would say, by virtue of the fact that you're here today, that maybe you might disagree with that. We're not all in love with the administrative side of grants, maybe the hitting impossible deadlines side of grants, maybe the financial management and the evaluation challenges of grants. That doesn't necessarily are all the things that we love about grant making and grant administration. What we do care about, I think, and everybody in this room is passionate about, is the mission behind the grants. And that's the reason I think that we're kind of in this work. It's because of the passion and it's things that we care about. It's the mission behind these agencies that are enabling others, that are empowering others, that are building capacity. Across the government. So I think that we're very happy to be here today and to actually share some information with you, right? My guess is that some of you haven't met each other yet, and right in this room are people tackling some of the same things that you're trying to tackle, so make sure you use the time after the session to get to know the folks that you're actually sitting right next to. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker. So Nalini Lamba Nieves is here joining us today. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Nalini. Nalini is with the Office of Post-Secondary Education at the U.S. Department of Education. And she has she oversees. While she does not oversee the $40+ billion of grants going on at education, she oversees some very important programs at Ed, especially around minority-serving institutions. And she's going to tell you a little bit more about the major programs that she has responsibility for. And but she got started 15 years ago, so we're not talking about someone who just got started in this business. She has a lot of content all kind of bundled up in her head, and so 15 years ago she was, I guess now she's working Title III, then she was working Title V. There must be a Title IV somewhere in there. I don't know, in your future. I don't know what's wedged between Title III and Title V, but we're very happy to hear that. Now, on a personal note, you know, Nalini has a life outside of her public service, and so she is an emerging, she would call it an emerging silversmith. I don't know, just judging from some of the silver I see on her wrists, maybe she's past the emerging state. I don't. Okay, no, not yet. Okay, but she actually designs and creates jewelry, and as something that she loves to do. And then we learned that she just got back from Peru, and so she visited Machu Picchu, which check that one off your bucket list. That's still on mine. But just to make things a little bit more interesting, she decided there's a mountain right next to Machu Picchu. It's like way higher than Machu Picchu, and it's called Huayna Picchu. And so she decided, well, I'm going to climb that mountain. It's only about 2 miles in elevation above sea level, and I'm getting winded just thinking about what it might be like thin air up there, 2 miles above sea level. So we're glad you made that trip, and we're glad you survived it. So, and you could be here today. So I'd like to everybody to join me in a warm welcome for Nalini and our speaker today.
Thank you, Paul. He was overly generous, but I do thank you for being here and taking the time on a beautiful day to learn more about our programs. What I want to do, because I know some of you are already in government, is see a show of hands of how many of you are from the federal government and manage grants or work with grants. Okay, yeah, large number of the room, a large portion of the room. So what I want to do mostly is start with a presentation on my program, my specific program, give you the background, get through those slides first, and then I'm going to open it up because, like I said, like the title says, it's going to be a conversation more than anything. We want to hear what you're doing. We will tell you, give you a background, tell you what we've done so far with evidence and working with minority serving institutions, and then open it up to what you all have been doing, are doing, or if you have suggestions. I have with me support from the Department of Education. Pretty much our institutional effectiveness team is here. Dr. John Clement, we have Chris McCormick over there, and Dr. Latasha Ile. So for the hard questions on numbers, they might be helping me because they are the ones who gather the data and collate it and try to find a way to make it work. Okay, so let's see. As Paul mentioned, I work for the Office of Post-Secondary Education. Within that, higher education programs. The program that I am currently working with is the Strengthening Institutions Program, Title III Part A. I'm the program lead for that program, and we basically deal with institutions of higher education, and we provide them money. The program has been around since 1965, so that should tell you something about incorporating evidence into a program that started when the Higher Education Act actually got enacted. But we give money to institutions of higher education who are eligible, and for eligible you have to be accredited, of course, and you have to serve a certain percentage of low-income students and have so you have to be a needy school, and you have to serve low-income students. The grants basically are for the schools to become self-sufficient. We want to help them expand their capacity to serve these students that they enroll, but also to improve them and strengthen them in the areas of academic quality, institutional management, and fiscal stability. Those are the big three, but there's also, under academic quality, student services and student outcomes are a big part of it. We have two types of grant awards, individual grants and cooperative grants. Cooperative grants are those where two or more institutions work together to solve common problems. And we do try to encourage those because, you know, if you're strong in something and another school next to you is not, it works great. Or if you're a 2-year and you want to work with a 4-year institution just to improve your pipeline, that is also wonderful. So we do encourage those. In our program, one of the things that's really special, besides working with, you know, schools that really educate a large number of low-income students, is that the schools tell us what they want to do. So unlike a lot of other programs that are very tailored, you know, this is a math and science program, or this is just for humanities, STEAM, STEM, our schools have a long list, and I'll go over it in a little bit, of things of allowable activities. There's around 13. And they pick from those and say, we're gonna do this. And within a proposal, they could do more than one. So they could be doing 2 separate activities that have nothing to do with each other. But they do address the needs of the institution. And this is where we come to, when you apply for a grant, you have to address these program-specific criteria that have been around for a very long time. So they tell us in your comprehensive development plan their strengths and weaknesses in the 3 areas that I mentioned of institutional stability, academic quality, and institutional management, fiscal stability, institutional management. What are their objectives, how they're going to implement it, who's going to manage this, what their management plan is, an evaluation plan. And I highlighted here the specifics of the evaluation plan just to give you an idea of pretty much the bar is not very high, especially if you talk about evidence and what evidence entails and trying to gather data. So basically it's that you have data elements and data collection procedures identified to measure the success of what you're doing, your objectives, and that there's a data analysis procedure that's going to be done that will give you some formative and summative results. Then there's the budget. But pretty much the bar for evaluation is just to make sure that you're actually going to gather some data. I mentioned that we have a lot of activities that our grantees tell us what they want to do with. And here are some of them. We've broken them down into the areas that they sort of fit into. So under academic quality, you could do anything from basic skill courses, faculty development, student services, of course, is very popular. So all kinds of counseling and tutoring and mentoring. Fiscal stability, so you could start an endowment or start a development office if you need that, because you know we all know that you need to get money. A lot of people don't have that good a relationship with their alumni, and so they want to strengthen that, and they start that with some of our grants. But also management information systems, you know, trying to make sure that the students that you have some sort of cohesive system where when they register and you're able to track them throughout. So many of our schools still do things on paper, and there is no way of connecting information. So you registered, but it doesn't show up in the professor's, you know, roll call for students. Well, what happened? Well, it got lost in this office. So a lot of our schools are trying to modernize, basically, and remove paper and try to make everything as seamless as possible for their students. Construction and renovation is also a big one, trying to make classrooms into smart classrooms. So those are some of the things that our grantees can do. As you can imagine, because of the purpose of our program, which is to educate low income, and the eligibility process, which is, you know, a large number of low income students and low expenditures, most of our institutions are public and 2-year institutions. We have some 4-year institutions. This is based on currently open grants and grants in what we call suspension. So they're still not completely closed out. But as you can see, the largest number of institutions that we have our public schools, and two-year public schools. So again, we're talking about institutions that are strapped for cash and that have a lot of need. So here's where I start talking about evidence, and from here on, it's anybody who wants to ask a question or interrupt, feel free to do so. This is what we've done with evidence. Actually, you know what? I'm going to skip this one first. Yes?
So, maybe I might be a bit ahead. Do you have a list of these organizations, these schools? And is there anything in the listing of who they might want to partner with, or the kind of partners they might be looking for?
We do have a list in our website. We list everybody who's been funded. And we do list their partners, and we have their abstracts. But it's not something who they might want to partner with is not something that we have. They decide. Again, they decide if they want to partner with who they want to partner with.
Well, for example, we're a small company, we're an ed tech company, and we're trying to figure out, you know, again, you're opening a door for us to say, oh, these people are looking for help. Well, we can give them, you know, their teachers, their support kind of tools, and so, but we need to talk to them to find out where the right fit. That's the kind of partnership I'm looking for.
Oh, okay. So basically, for them to hire your company to see if you can help them
might be a
improve.
Grant, might be a grant involved, and you know, so you're the grants person. So we're thinking.
Yeah, the grant goes to the institution itself, so you would have to be
partner.
Yeah, but not a partner institution. So you would have to be basically what they call a subcontractor. The institution has to contract you, because if you are listed as a partner, then it wouldn't be eligible.
So my question is that, is there a listing of this? Is there a place that can help guide a company like ours?
Our website.
Okay.
Our website has the list of funded institutions and their abstracts, and it's guided by fiscal year.
Great.
So you can look at our website and see who we funded so far and what they proposed to do with their grants. I'm going to move this a little bit, change it a little bit, just to start with, what is evidence? So I'm sure for those of you, can I get a show of hands of how many of you already work with evidence or trying to incorporate better data gathering, better? Okay, so we have a few hands. So for the department, the definition of evidence is basically we have strong and moderate evidence. We also now have evidence of promise. And it's becoming, per our grantees, because trust me, when I go out and do technical assistance workshops, this is one of the complaints. It's becoming more and more stringent every year because it's based on the What Works Clearinghouse definition of what is strong and moderate evidence. And I have that here for, I am a literature major, and I half the time do not understand some of the stuff that is written here. But basically it has to meet their standards with reservations or without reservations. And if it's with reservations, then there's other conditions attached to it about sample size and multi-site samples, and it's also got to do with quasi-experimental designs and things like that, that, you know, are very interesting. I've learned a lot about evidence in the last few years. So it makes it simpler to just focus on, because the What Works Clearinghouse was started by the Institute on Education Sciences, which is also under the Department of Education, in 2002. And it was meant as a repository of scientifically backed studies that showed that some grantees have, or any other institution of higher education has applied this model, and these were the results. It doesn't necessarily focus on success, but it focuses on the method. So again, it's a scientifically backed thing. So it's not results oriented necessarily, although a lot of the studies do show results, but the focus is on the statistically significant impact for the outcome. Sample size, you have to have a control group and they have to mirror each other. And then, what's the effectiveness of the study? That is not the priority. And for our program, as you saw in our purpose, we want to make our institutions self-sufficient. So we want you to work. We want you to work towards changing these students, but that runs a little bit contrary to this that tells you if you want to have, and those of you that deal with data know, if you want to have statistically significant impacts or sample, comparisons, you have to do the same thing throughout a certain period of time with that same population. For our grants, what we tell our grantees is, you have an evaluator, you have the evaluation plan. If you said you were going to train, say, you're going to tutor 50 students, right? And you only got 5 to the first session. Your evaluator's job, in the way we had been doing it, was to give you suggestions on how to increase that number so that you meet that 50 student target that you reported to us. You said to the department, we are going to, train, we're going to tutor 50 students. Eventually to get those 50 students to get retained, but in the short term, we're going to do that. So your evaluator's job is to come up with ideas, and the institutional staff, of course, come up with ideas on how to get more students there. Well, that runs completely contrary to this, where you are supposed to hold steady and do it the same way, just to show that you did it in that manner, that you held to the definition of a sample population and a control population getting the same information steady over time. If you change it every year to try and get to 50, you're not meeting the definition of the moderate evidence or what works. Am I right, John?
Let me just add that if you were to go back to that list of institutional management and those what we call focus areas, a lot of that just is not relevant to this kind of approach to assessment. If you put in a business management process, you're not going to be able to provide evidence of its effectiveness in anything resembling a model such as this. You just have no hope. So you kind of have to triage that area if you want to be serious about accepting this notion of providing evidence of effectiveness. You've got to triage this into the things that you might conceivably be able to provide a comparison group or some kind of framework within which the evidence would work. And given, as Nalini said, that it's the institution that proposes what it wants to do, we have very little control over being able to integrate across projects some kind of standard approach, much less standard measures of the approach. So we've been having a very interesting discussion with our Office of Management and Budget, with our own leadership about, this is a nutty idea. Why are we doing this? But obviously it's not a discussion we're going to win. But we would like to find a way of steering a sort of middle course in this. So the conversation that we're bringing to you is, how do we do that? How do we sort projects once they're given to us? How do we sort the grants into the ones that we can pay attention to in some way? How do we keep them on course for a long period of time? How do we train our own staff to monitor in a way that preserves fidelity to a model over a 5-year grant period? That's sort of where we see this. Yeah, Kathy?
Yes.
In their grant proposal, are they required to construct a theory of change that identifies how the process should evolve to produce the desired outcomes?
We don't call it a process of change. Basically, they have activity objectives, and and a project implementation plan, and they have overall institutional objectives. So increased retention would be under their comprehensive development plan. So they talk about strengths and weaknesses. This is what we want to do. Then in their activity section, they say, this is how we're going to target improving retention. And that's when they pick and choose what activity they want to do. And then implementation plan, this is how we're going to put it to work. But the focus, again, is always on achieving the objectives of the institution. So, and that's what John alluded to. We are trying to gather data for studies, possibly, number one. And number two, we are trying to gather data as program officers on the success of the grant. So the success of the grant is measured on basically what they said they were going to do. Did you do it? Did you train those 50 students?
Outputs rather than outcomes.
Yes.
Right.
And the other issue is that the What Works Clearinghouse focus on method, as Nalini mentioned, forces the institution to pick a study that meets the What Works Clearinghouse as evidence that they are methodologically apt. But the weak link has been, is that in any way related to the main focus of the activities you're going to undertake? If not, it becomes an exercise in, I don't know, Chinese poetry. You know, I am proficient at the language of evaluation. It has nothing to do with what we're going to do once we get your money, but, you know, I am proficient at it.
Touching back on something you said, these are our activities. This is a repeat of that slide I had, but I've highlighted pretty much the only activities under academic quality and student services that you can find a study for currently in the What Works Clearinghouse that could remotely link to this. It may not be exactly what you need to do or what you want to do. So for example, there's a study there on texting students when their financial aid runs out and trying to give them a heads up, oh, you need to apply for your financial aid, don't forget to apply, because they found that, you know, that's part of the problem. A lot of students forget to file on time, can't pay for college, drop out. So a lot of our grantees use that as a model, but how is it being implemented? How does it link to your actual grant, what you want to do? Well, there's some sort of relationship, there's some sort of relevance, but I need those 3 points, and I'm going to go back and talk about how we've done it, and so you can understand the points and all that. But that's a study I found that somewhat relates to, you know, what I want, you know, counseling, possibly. So that's what I'm going to use. And again, it gets lost in translation because, and what John mentioned, this is where we want to get to for tech in terms of our future, technical assistance and assessment. So right here in the pre-award section, the fit to institution and population and relevance is a big problem for us. Particularly for our other programs within my division, the tribal colleges, the Asian American Pacific Islander institutions, the Alaska Native institutions, Native Hawaiian institutions, even the Hispanic Serving institutions, which is a separate division. It's hard. There are no studies currently in the WWC, because I checked right before coming, no studies right now that deal specifically with these populations. Again, there are articles and there are studies done out there, but they don't necessarily meet the stringent requirements of the What Works Clearinghouse in order to be included in the database. So you could cite other studies, but again, that doesn't get you the points.
We do, Catherine, just to go back directly to your question, we do now require a logic model.
No, that's not even required.
It's not required. I said corrected. We've discussed requiring a logic model and in at least some of our other programs. But again, in order to use a logic model, you have to understand a logic model. And it has to bear some relationship to a theory of action that you have for the program.
And that requires also an act of Congress to put in the technical part of it. Our program has program-specific selection criteria. That's in our regulations, and some of it is in our statute. So changing those regulations requires, there's a period. We might even have to go through negotiated rulemaking in order to be able to incorporate a logic model, unless you do it, which is how we've done it, and I'll talk about it in a little bit, as priorities. Some of our smaller programs started with logic models. I'm not really sure how well that went, because it's not the program I manage, but yes.
So a lot of this looks like it's about building capacity. And I know, is anybody here from the Corporation for National and Public Service? Because they have a lot of money goes out to give, like, literally, they give you AmeriCorps volunteers for a year, and then you're supposed to measure and demonstrate improvement in capacity. And so they've been struggling, well, they've been succeeding, I'm sure. But anyway, they've been dealing with how do you measure capacity. But basically, you're talking about pre and post measurement of something that would demonstrate capacity. And because a lot of the things you're talking about is really building capacity. And so I feel your pain, because I can't see that things on the What Works Clearinghouse are going to be dealing with how to, adequately and effectively measure change in capacity building. So anyway, I've been working with a corporation and thinking through that.
Yes.
Subhash Kari, RES Systems. I had two questions. One is, what percentage of institutions that apply to your program actually get funded? And second, what sort of risk reviews do you do as part of your pre-award reviews in support of implementing the uniform guidance that was recently passed?
So we had, in the last competition, 300 applicants, roughly, and we funded 40.
Wow.
Yes, so there's a lot of demand for our program. Again, because it is a program, this is the parent program from where, for example, the HSI, Hispanic Serving Institutions program, came out of. This is where the tribal colleges and universities is housed. So Title III Part A is the big title of it. Strengthening Institutions is the largest program within Title III Part A, but there's also the tribal colleges, there's also the Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, and recently with the HUA, we have the Asian American Pacific Islander program. So our program is the one that's pretty much open to people who don't necessarily have 10% of Asian American Pacific Islanders, or 20%, or 10% of Native Hawaiian, but you have a conglomeration of students, different percentages that will add up to roughly 50% of minority students within your school, or that receive, Title IV Pell Grants, Federal Work Study, things like that. So that answers your first question. So second question, risk management happens pretty much once we've decided who's getting funded. Once we have a slate, so our reviewers have reviewed the grants for those selection criteria that I presented earlier, and scored the applications on how well they addressed those criteria. Then once we have a slate based on score, because it's always based on score, program officers don't have a choice of saying, for example, NSF does that you can say, well, this one seems to do it better. I don't know, regardless of what the reviewer said, this one does this better, or this one addresses this priority that we prefer. We don't have that. It's based on score. Then our Office of Risk Management pretty much just looks at the institutional history, their audit reports, and Chris can correct me if I'm wrong.
How much do you want to know? One half of the team. So the department's now using and has been using, OPE has adopted what's called the entity risk review, and it's done by a risk management services. And for an institution, it looks at 3 major categories: internal controls, which is the audits, Dun & Bradstreet financial information, whether they've been paying their bills on time, and then internal information from the department. So, have they been on route payment for other grants, in the past? Have they had frequent program officer changes in staff personnel? And they divide, each category has a score between 0 and 100. And there are certain thresholds, green, yellow, and red. The higher the score, you'll hit one of these possible categories at that point. And what we do as the risk team will make the recommendations to program officers on this institution has, these following, possible issues. This helps them make their decision in terms of what they will fund or how they will, if they do decide to fund, what technical assistance they may provide to help mitigate those potential risk areas.
So it's not done in the pre-award stage. It's done when we're almost ready to award. That's when they come in and they tell us. And we send, if you are a high-risk institution, it will be in our slate. So the memo that goes to the Secretary of Education's office will say, oh, so-and-so school has been found to be high risk. These are the steps that we are going to take to monitor them to make sure that if they are recipients of this grant, they are going to get better.
Have you ever not funded an institution based on the fact that they were, even though they scored well, they were really high risk, and you decided that you are not going to take the risk?
Not to my knowledge.
Not that I'm aware of either. I mean, we've
15 years, I've never heard of that.
So it's just based on the quality of the application?
Yeah. Because most of the ones that wouldn't make it have probably already lost accreditation or on show cause status. I mean, accreditation is usually the biggest risk factor of all of those that we would look at. Most of those happen long before they get done anyway. They probably didn't apply because of the institutional issue probably already going.
Okay, can we go back?
Can I
Yes,
ask a question?
of course.
Just a quick question. The evidence-based piece of this, how much burden does that place on the grantee? I'm trying to get a sense of the additional burden that might just be falling on the grantees to participate, to engage in the way that you need them to.
They will argue, and we would argue, a lot of burden to think it through. But what we've ended up with is what John referred to as Chinese poetry exercise. What they've done, and they've gotten savvy at, is they pick a study from the What Works Clearinghouse that somewhat is relevant to what they're doing and put it in there, get their points, try to follow it as best they can. But again, because our grantees can do multiple activities, it only has to be, and you're anticipating my next slide, which is great. It only has to be related to one of those activities. So you are free to do, again, partly because something like institutional fiscal management system has no study attached to it. So we can't require you to have a grant that's completely evidence-based. So in the beginning, for them to even conceive of evidence and looking at the studies and how they didn't directly match what they wanted to do was very hard. It was burdensome. Now they've found the trick, which is great for them, but again, it still doesn't help us with data gathering or making sure that we have potentially a grantee that could publish a study that ends up at the WWC. So going back to this slide, this is about how we've done evidence. This is the Strengthening Institutions Program, and it started in 2012 when we got the call, you need to do evidence. I wasn't in the program at the time. I was with the front office at the time, but the way it was done was we did it, and I mentioned this before, competitive preference priority. So those are priorities the department sets and assigns points to. So if you address this, then you get extra points. And our grants, as I mentioned, thanks to your question, are very competitive. So out of 300, we funded 40. Everybody wants to do something that gets them an extra point. In 2012, it was the first program within our division and within IS, actually, that did evidence. So they incorporated strong evidence and moderate evidence, and there was a point variance. And the applicants, again, chose from the What Works Clearinghouse studies. The process. So applicants had an additional 5 pages, because we have page limits for our grants, to address this CPP of evidence. However, and I scoured this document, the Federal Register document and the application booklet, there was no direct mention of relevance. You just had, because we didn't know. We were already gearing up for this competition when someone told us, you need to incorporate evidence. Okay, so there's no mention of relevance. You have 5 additional pages to talk about your competitive preference priority. But we didn't give them, that much guidance because we ourselves didn't know. And then in that year, IES, people that run the WWC, so the Institute for Education Sciences, they reviewed the study and the relevance 5 extra pages, and they assigned the points. They told us who met strong evidence and who met moderate evidence, and how we should add those extra points. That proved to be yes.
It is critical that you realize they did not read the proposals.
Yes.
They only read the 5 pages.
They read the 5
that's what
pages.
I said. The 5 pages.
These
and
are
the study.
evaluation experts, highly trained in methodology, in a very specific form of methodology. Strong evidence is only randomized controlled trials.
Yes.
Moderate evidence is comparison group. That's all that's allowed. Nothing else counts as evidence. So they didn't read the proposal. They read your methodological analysis of the study that they put in the What Works Clearinghouse. Our staff is not trained in doing this. We had no means of follow-up. None of those procedures have any post-award follow-up that relates to the pursuit of evidence.
Correct.
Okay, so I want you to understand why I call it Chinese poetry. It's an exercise. If you are fluent at methodology, you write good 5 pages, you get the points, you get the award.
Yes.
But then later you don't have to say how you did what you said you were going to do?
We had no means of following up.
No.
I'm not being critical.
No,
I'm
no,
just-
no.
I'm not defending it.
No. And then part of the problem too is, like most government
You're not
agencies,
attacking, I'm not defending it.
we're
It's silly.
short-staffed. We have, each of us in my division have over 50 grants. Most of them now have evidence because we've been doing this since 2012. So then it falls upon me, and this is one of the things that I ask people all the time. Every time I go to these meetings and they keep talking about evidence in my program, I'm like, how do I know, unless I read the application, the study, and those 5 extra pages, how do I know that a simple request to change, hey, we said in that example, keeping up with the example on texting students about their financial aid, so we said we were going to use this company, but Bailey's company was more expensive, and our school, the salaries went up, so the grant has to match, pay what the school pays. So we're going to have to divert some funds, and so Paul's company will send, instead of Bailey's 15 texts, which is what the study said, Paul's company comes in cheaper, but they're going to send 12 texts. As a program officer who hasn't read the study, isn't trained in any of this, this sounds reasonable because you have to have salary parity, and this is, in a normal grant setting, a reasonable request. It is completely a reasonable request. You're still doing what you said you were going to do, but you might have just, by approving this change, I might have just completely damaged and thrown away any possibility of this school using their evidence piece as an article or as a supporting document for that WWC study, because now you're sending 12 texts instead of 15.
Nalini, we also have completely lost sight of whatever the original intent was to show that something that we were doing improved retention or graduation rates, or you know,
Not to
we're
mention-
pursuing this methodological rabbit down this hole simply because we've been instructed to do so.
Not to mention that that particular study, because I did read it, showed results in year 1. So students were retained at a better rate in year 1 from those texts, but the results went significantly less in year 2. So again, we're focusing on getting studies that are scientifically proven with correct methodology, but the results are not the focus. And our grants, the whole point is to get the schools to be self-sufficient, which is why we tell them, have your evaluator come in and you know, suggest changes, make sure you educate, because we want those low-income students to graduate, to, you know, get retained and to graduate eventually from the institution. But that is a little counterintuitive to this. So in 2013, usually we have a competition every other year. 2013, lucky me, I was assigned to the team and told we're having another competition with evidence. The way we did it this time, to separate and acknowledge the difference between the purpose of our grants based on the statute and evidence, is we separated it. So it's still the Strengthening Institutions Program, but we created a separate CFDA number, Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance, is what that acronym stands for. We love those in the federal government. We created a separate CFDA, 84031F, and made evidence an absolute priority. Absolute priorities have no points assigned to them, but if you don't address them, you're not getting funded. So if you could have written the best proposal in the world. If it didn't have evidence in it as a central piece, you're out. Doesn't matter. So that way we were still being true to the intent of the program, but keeping with the desire for additional data and evidence and, you know. So we made it mandatory. The F applicants had the additional 5 pages. They had to identify their top 3 activities. So this is, again, applicant self-identified, top 3 activities. And this time we just did moderate evidence. We didn't do strong evidence. After 2012, we have not done strong evidence. It's too hard for our grantees, you know, to come up with studies for strong evidence. So we've done moderate evidence. And for moderate evidence, you need to include up to 2 studies per activity. So 6 studies. The award amounts, I showed you earlier, they range from $400,000 to $450,000. For F grantees, we went up to $2 million a year. Because we wanted to really, you know, put meat behind this evidence. Again, we still have no training for staff, we still have no, but, you know, we're trying to give grantees the tools, at least, to try and do evidence correctly. IES this year reviewed the studies, and our peer reviewers reviewed the relevance. We talked about relevance, and we said you need to, in those 5 pages, you need to tell us how those activities match the studies that you have proposed you were going to do. And if you divert from that, you have to explain why you're diverting and how you are justifying how it's not going to affect the impact of that study in your particular institution. And the peer reviewers just said yes or no, it's relevant. They themselves didn't get that much training in that either. But the points ultimately are assigned on whether IES tells us the studies met moderate evidence or not. That's always been the case. We always do everything by points, and so if IES says they get 3 points, they get 3 points. IES rejects this. They don't want to be the ones that decide how many points a grantee gets. So that's always been a little bit of a tension. But I cannot give 3 points to someone who maybe the relevance piece was brilliant. But if IES says that study didn't meet moderate evidence, how am I going to give you points? So therein lies a little bit of a conundrum. We funded, in 2014, we went back to our old system of 1 year yes, 1 year no in competitions. So between 2013 and 2014, we funded 11 grants under F, 5 this year and 6 this year that actually met moderate evidence and scored high enough. Those grantees have still complete the same annual performance report as everybody else. We don't have a separate means of asking them. We can't even ask them for, as Barbara and I were talking, too much information because you can't burden the grantees. We have to, Paperwork Reduction Act. So how much we can ask for is very limited. What we have tried to do is, what's your external evaluator report say? Could you please send that to us to look through? But again, their external evaluator might not even understand evidence. Yes?
Is there a set aside of a proportion that they have to spend on evaluation of the grant? Like, do you say you must spend 2% or?
No.
Is it designated like, okay, we'll give you 400,000 and then we'll also give you 40,000 for an evaluation?
No.
Nothing, there's no mechanism to specifically fund the evaluation part?
No. That is something that we are actually considering for 2017, but we're still in talks about this next year.
Those set-asides are like essential.
Yes.
If you don't have set-asides for the evaluation and monitoring part, you forget it.
Yes. Yes, and John can actually give you lovely stories about him trying to talk to, find an institutional researcher at an institution to actually even begin to gather data for a real, quote-unquote, evaluation.
Let me bring up 2 points that relate to this. Our staff is not trained in evaluation, so follow-up is an issue, and technical assistance is very important. The person who manages the grant at the institution works in the Office of Sponsored Programs. And they don't know anything about evaluation. Their connection to the institutional researchers depends on the institution, but it tends to be fairly tenuous. And they don't command a lot of the chancellor or the provost or the vice president for administration's attention. They did while they were writing the proposal, because everybody wanted a piece of the proposal, so they all weighed in. But after that, our requests for, we'd really like to know how the evaluation is proceeding and so on. We'd like to know if the retention rates are going up. And the person at sponsored programs says, why are you asking me these questions? What I can do is I make sure there's a tutoring fund and the faculty is trained and I manage the outputs, The rest of it is not my department, sorry.
Because it's separate.
I know, I understand. It has, but if it's nobody's job to do it, it's not going to get done.
Correct.
Yes.
This is just a wonderful story. We should write this up to be a case to use in graduate school.
Well, we're bringing it to you for this exact purpose.
Yes, but I would also like to highlight that it's not, I didn't bring it up as a negative. I'm not trying to bash
No, I don't
the
mean that. I mean,
department.
this is just reality.
We're learning, and
Yeah.
we're trying to learn, and in integrating something that is fairly new to a program that, again, and I printed out, I was telling Bailey, I printed out the language from the Higher Education Act 1965 that authorizes this program. So it's a very old program, and we're trying to stuff evidence into it without having mechanisms or even funds, because we have another program that was funded first in the world, but they had, the way that program was written and structured, and because it was new, brand new, they were able to have a firm of external evaluators come and pretty much redo the evaluation portion of all those grantees and tell them how they were going to rework their grant to get the data that was necessary for this. But we don't have that kind of money, and second, again, program specific selection criteria. To change that, we might have to go through negotiated rulemaking. Therefore, this is why we do priorities, and especially priorities with points or absolute priorities, so that we could incorporate changes or innovation into the grant without changing the very nature of the program. And then in 2015, this last year, what we did, so everybody's incorporating evidence. IES, like everybody else, is understaffed, overwhelmed. So we went down to the applicant selected one activity. We went from 3, of course, they were getting a lot more money in 2013 under that separate CFDA number, so that made sense. We did away with that separate CFDA number. We went back to what we did in 2012 of it's all together, it's a competitive preference priority, worth 3 points for moderate evidence. That's it, and everybody gets the same amount of money. No, you don't get more money or less money because you're doing evidence. You have the same 5 pages to address relevance, but you select now one activity out of your proposal that has to be paired with the 2 studies to meet moderate evidence. IES reviews the studies, peer reviewers reviewed relevance in a narrative this time. So rather than a yes-no format, we asked them to talk about relevance and then assign points based on that narrative. That assigned points based on a narrative was not such a good idea because the problem came that if IES determined the study didn't meet moderate evidence, and we tell them, well, you know, you didn't score 103, you scored 100 because your study ultimately, but the reviewer said, and it's in my, technical review form, the reader's comments, because we hand them out to grantees so that they can improve their grants possibly if they didn't get funded, use the reviewer's comments to improve them for next year or the year after. Wait, the reviewer gave me points, and now you're telling me I scored 100? How is that? So it was a little confusing. We're not doing that again. But again, it was a lesson learned based on trying to get the reviewers, which is what IES wants, more involved in determining the relevance, and then have the program decide who gets the points. Because if the reviewer finds no relevance, but IES says the study does meet evidence, because by now we've told them, go pick a study that meets, moderate evidence. Well, we don't tell them that, but they have CRD, they have different groups that have told them that, this is a way to get around this whole piece. Should we give them the points or not? Do we have, as department employees, the ability to say, well, there's no relevance, so no, you're not getting the points even though you picked a study that meets evidence? There was a question.
So we talked a little bit earlier about training specifically. Is there any sort of training initiatives that are going to be entering the scene in the 2017 fiscal year by chance, or is there no money to train? Okay. Just curious.
There's no money. We pretty much, program officers and program leads attend the IES presentation when we do technical assistance for our grantees, mostly via webinars. Program officers do attend and listen to what they have to say about what is moderate evidence, how do you pick a study, when they first started, I have the presentations. It starts as something as basic as a newspaper article will not be considered evidence because people thought, or, a study published in your institution's newspaper is not, even though you have data and you're showing results, you showed that the class of 2013 graduated at a higher rate because they received all this. There's no comparison group, so those are not going to be evidence. They're great to inform your project and to inform why you want to do what you want to do, but that's not going to get you the points, and that's not going to address what the department is talking about with evidence. Barbara, and then Paul.
Two things, if I can, based on the setting aside the amount of money for an evaluation when you have it. I came from outside to the government, and one of the things when we did not have a cap that said you have to have so much evaluation, and we would put our 20% or whatever in, our board would come back and say, well, you don't really need that amount of money. Right. Let's cut it. And go back in and use it for this or that, some special project they want it done. But when we go back and say, oh no, it's required that we have X number of dollars to do our evaluation, then they had no way of saying, take that money away from us. So I wanted to put a plug in for that on the other side. But when you're doing basically the capacity building things you're doing and setting up, in 5 years, you're just basically laying out the bottom time frame, especially in fiscal management. Are you able to go back in another 5 years to see, are they still doing that? You know, like survey them again to see, because it's a generational type of thing. It's like making any community change.
We do require that they put happy verbiage about institutionalization and adoption in the grant language.
Yeah, I used to write that too.
There's, exactly, that is required there, but they're required to keep records anywhere between 3 and 5 years after the grant ends.
Yes, after the end. I mean, we're all required to do that, but
we are not, first, we don't have the capacity, and second, we are not required or, you know, able to go back and say, hey, you did this and it was a fairly successful grant based on looking at your annual performance reports. You did what you said you were going to do in the grant. How are you doing now? No, we check iPads. We could check iPads and see what's going on, but that doesn't give you the whole story. That doesn't tell me, oh, it's South Dakota and the oil boom or fracking or whatever's going on meant that a lot of kids left school because they could make a lot more money working in the oil industry than going to college and getting into debt.
yeah, I just didn't know if you had gone back and done something like that.
Yes. Whoa, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
Just with the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act kind of pending, is there any talk of changes to the program via that channel?
No.
Well, yes and no. But again, our political leaders don't know what line of business we're in, to be very blunt. Okay, they will come in with a new idea, evidence, whatever, and recommend that it be adopted. And you know, somewhere in our grant bureaucracy, paragraphs get inserted into the notice inviting applications. But nobody thinks through the entire process. And our political appointees don't often ask our senior staff or people like Nalini, what's going on? You know, does this make sense? Should we try this? Of course, we're very risk avoidant as a group, and so we're likely to say, nah, we tried that 10 years ago, it didn't work, you know. So after a while they get vaccinated against asking for advice. You know, it's sort of a comedy of errors, a Keystone Cop sort of, you know, approach for any of you who remember old movies. You know, I don't have an answer. We are beginning to understand what it would take to actually do this. And we, you know, unfortunately, it's a year in which our senior political leaders will all leave town and will be replaced with another bunch. We're pretty sure that the notion of improving performance management through the use of evidence that relates to what you're actually doing is an idea that will survive, right? And we'd like
It's a good idea. I mean, it's something that it's basically.
We love it.
And we do like it. But what we're saying is we need to step back. And what they're saying is there's no turning back. We started evidence in 2012 with this program. We want to see if we can use you as a poster child. Oh, no, you can't.
Oh,
We've
yes,
done
you
it
can.
different. We can't even follow the WWC definitions of evidence because we've done it differently every year with completely, well, similar results in that we have none. But we do need to take a step back. Let's start with a logic model. Let's start with letting them tell us, okay, well, and we tell them in our technical assistance workshops, I tell them, okay, so what did your accreditation team, when they came, say you have to work on? Use that for writing your grant and what you need. Is the college down the street a similar college from you? What are they doing and they've improved results, okay, use that as a model. But you need to explain how you think that's going. But we need to step back and go all the way back. We went from 0 to 150 without any kind of preparation, training, technical assistance, you know. So that's been a problem, Paul.
Yeah, Nalini, I just, I remember our meeting in your office, and I remember when we brought this topic up, you got pretty jazzed about, okay, it was like, well, I'm hoping someone in that audience can help, right? Because I'm kind of sensing, I don't know that you've bounced around, you're just testing and experimenting as you move through to look for ways to do this better. I'm just kind of curious, we only have a few minutes left, I'm curious, is the Department of Education the only department out there wrestling with this topic, wrestling with this issue? I know that one of the things that you were hoping to hear from was an agency that's, or a department that's, you know, either a step ahead, a step behind, but learning fast. Or
I've heard that Labor Department is doing evidence.
Oh, here's the Labor Department block seating.
I know, that's why I'm looking over here. Is that not true? Don't you? I love this new expression.
It is, but I
doing
mean,
evidence.
it's different than what education is doing here. They're capacity building. We're actually serving individuals to get them employed, get them credentials and things like that.
So you do evidence?
Yes, we have concrete measures for employment and earnings compared to pre-program normally.
But is it by individual? So do you fund? I'm sorry, I'm making.
Services are individualized, so there's nothing that's consistent throughout.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
I work with the Department of HUD and Housing and Urban Development. Now, we don't directly deal with evidence, but we've been using the logic model for as long as I've been there, and doing the measurables and outcomes for. I work in public housing, so all of the Section 8 or elderly housing or family self-sufficiency, you mentioned self-sufficiency, but we use the logic model on every grant. When it gets monitored, they have to go in and report all of the measurables. So we've been doing that. That's been a requirement for us. It's an OMB form that they get approved to, and it gets updated every 3 years, I believe.
And it's uniform. You have uniform measures, right? Because you're focusing on 3 specific processes that, and you have developed specific measures that they need to accomplish.
Right. I can give you an example. So we have 1-year grants and 3-year grants.
Mm-hmm.
So for the 1-year grants, they'll give us, let's say, education, financial literacy, outreach. And then they'll say, for the households, 3 people per household. Then they'll say, the evaluation tool was a host test or survey. Then for the 3-year grants, they give us year 1, year 2, year 3, and then the totals logic model that says what the total outcome should be at the end of the grant.
Okay, and that's worked? Have you met the targets?
Usually, so what we do in our requirement says you have to have at least 10 graduates. So for the next time that they apply, their past performance has to show at least 10 graduates from the year before. If they said 30 folks or 40, you use 50, they had to show who's been successful in either getting a home, if it's related to that, or the salary doing a program implementation.
And if they don't meet it, is there like a way for them to say, well, this happened, because there's so many variables, you know, like, well, this happened and we were on our way to getting a home and my father broke his leg and couldn't, you know, work, and so the loan was denied, for example, something.
Right, so since we're dealing with the actual housing authority and not the individual families,
oh, okay.
They'll give us a report based on that housing unit.
Okay, so you, yeah, right, okay, so you don't work with the individuals themselves. Okay.
So I just, would it be time for one last quick question, or, and also Nalini
Or
might be
another
able-
example?
Nalini might be able to stick around for a few minutes if you want to attack her on this topic after the presentation. So Nalini, I just wanted, you actually have one more slide I wanted to share with everybody real quick. Yeah, keep going, all the way to the end. All the way to the end. One more. Oh, Okay, so this is proof. This is proof that that
This was
Nalini.
not my slide, this is his doing.
Okay, this is proof that Nalini did scale that Huayna Picchu, and that's Machu Picchu in the background there. So I'd like to everybody join me in that.
Thank you very much. That was
thank you.
great. Oh my gosh, I really
Thank you.
enjoyed this. I learned new words. Happy language. I love it. I like happy language.
And don't forget, you have the survey in your folders. We're looking for topics, for speakers, for any way that you can suggest to improve the quality of these forums and participation, etc. So if you just take a moment, and drop it right there at the registration desk with Bailey or Kristen or Amber or whoever's back there, and you don't have to write your name on it if you want to give us anonymous feedback. Nalini, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much.